Expect in-depth analysis and genuine conversations about the major issues affecting the supply chain today. Welcome to Supply Chain Demystified. Your host is none other than the distinguished supply chain expert, Dr. Nick Vias. Professor Vias is the Academic Director of USC Marshall Global Supply Chain Management and Founding Executive Director of USC Marshall Randall R. Kendrick Global Supply Chain Institute.
Well, welcome back to Supply Chain Demystified podcast. Today, we're diving deep into the future of AI and what it means for you personally and professionally, as well as your industry. We will be exploring the latest trends and the importance of new policy you need to know about, an exciting opportunity, as well as the challenges on the horizon. We're privileged to be joined by a distinguished leader at an intersection of technology, policy, and global strategy. As the Director of Artificial Intelligence Policy at the Software and Information Industry Associations, known as SIIA, she's at the forefront of shaping the regulatory landscape of AI. She spearheads advocacy efforts supporting industry members as they navigate the complex challenges and opportunities presented by AI with the rapid evolution. A seasoned expert with extensive experience across the private and public sectors, she has held roles at the Capstone LLC, Alliance of America, the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, the Oregon State Treasury, and the Office of Governor Kate Brown. She holds a master's degree in strategy, cybersecurity, and intelligence from Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies and Bachelor of Arts from William Eda University. Let's welcome Bethany Abbate. Bethany, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
We've been wanting to do this, and I'm so happy that our stars have aligned, the planets are in the right orbital structure. Here we are. I think this is such an important topic that I'm really excited to deep dive into during our conversation on the podcast.
Yes, I'm excited as well. There is a lot evolving very quickly in this space and on this topic, and I'm really excited to share my insights.
Look forward to it. So let's jump right into it. You have sort of a unique vantage point from policy side, on the government side, working with them, as well as you actually have worked in a private industry, and specifically private equity firms. How do you see this both sides coming together and the emergence of this AI world?
That's a great question. I think that given the complexity of everything happening and how fast the AI world is evolving, I think there's a lot of value in collaboration across stakeholder groups and across industries, especially when we're talking about the public policy decisions that are being made that are going to impact the businesses that are trying to innovate in this space. So I think it's really important to listen to the background and the expertise of people in their industries who have been building up their acumen for a very long time with other forms of technology, and then using lessons learned in AI, but then also looking at it as a unique use case and figuring out where there are gaps that need to be addressed, both from the business side and then building on that, then what type of guardrails and regulations do we potentially need?
So Bethany, at SIIA, if you will, for the audience at least, explain the role of your organizations, their stakeholders' engagement, and your inner exchange between the industry and the policymaker.
Sure. So the Software and Information Industry Association, also known as SIIA, has a total of nearly 400 member companies that are a part of our association. This is a really big range of types of companies and industries and sectors that are represented. So we have some of the largest technology platforms such as Google, Meta, Amazon, Apple, Anthropic, who are really leading the charge when it comes to AI development and deployment. But we also have a lot of companies that are just deploying AI, such as financial information, market data companies, education technology companies. We have a lot who are deploying AI in the K-12 space, for example, data analytics firms, cybersecurity firms, startups. So we have a lot of companies, big and small, who are doing a variety of things with AI. And in my role as a policy advocate and a government relations representative of the association, what I do is I work with our member companies to figure out where are their consensus policy positions across our industry membership that can be essentially agreed upon, where then I go out and I advocate to lawmakers on those positions. So I actually work across both the state level, the federal level, and a little bit the international level in terms of representing our members, both in like meeting with lawmakers directly, to discuss and negotiate legislative packages, to submitting formal comments to the executive branch, for example, on a variety of topics related to AI that the government is exploring. And in culmination, it's a really interesting opportunity and a valuable perspective, I think, being from the vantage point of an industry association, because you're able to be representative on behalf of so many people. And of course, there are discrepancies, and different organizations have their own business objectives in the AI ecosystem. But I think it holds a lot of weight in policy conversations, being able to come forward with consensus-driven positions to hopefully move the landscape forward.
Yeah, so if you look at it in traditional setup, right, in your role or the organization like SIAA, you typically are representing the industry and their voice and their objective to make sure the policymakers have either background information, but their objectives are heard and hopefully weaved into the policy. Is this
Correct.
also the case in AI, or the SIIA also look at it from the consumer standpoint of what is the most ethical way of actually striking the balance between what the policymaker might want, industry may want, and what's really good for the humanity?
Yeah, absolutely. And, beyond just collaborating with industry, of course, I do regularly coordinate and collaborate with civil society groups, with academic researchers who are also bringing forward their perspective to these conversations. Because I don't believe, and SIA doesn't believe, that this should just be industry-led decisions. Of course, we think industry brings a lot of expertise and best practices and direct knowledge of how their technology works, and that needs to be understood by lawmakers. But lawmakers also have to understand what their constituencies are experiencing. And I think industry needs to understand how consumers are adapting, what their sentiments are, and then, frankly, what their perspectives are. And I think that has an increasingly very important role in the policy discussions that we're having.
So Bethany, as you know, you attended our 13th annual Global Supply Chain Excellence Summit. By the way, thank you. And I am very bullish. I've always been pro technology guy. I've always been pro advancement guy. I feel extremely bullish about what AI is about to offer the humanity as a whole. And obviously there is a huge concerns in my mind that I'm going to really share with you my perspective, and I would love to hear your on that. But every time when I speak about this in keynotes across the world, one of the things comes up, and I often broach this subject is about the ethical concerns of integrating AI into the organization. Do we have those guardrails? What are those? For the audience purposes, if you were to just use some use case in which you can say, here what the guardrail should look like. Obviously, it will be different from company to company, industry to industry, country to country. But I am sure we are looking at it something that can work across the civilization where we, from the policymakers to the practitioners to the society, that we can all align with it. Is there such framework, A, exist, or B, we're discussing about it or hypothesizing at this point?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. There's a variety of frameworks and approaches and best practices that are aimed at addressing concerns. And I think it's valid to have concerns, especially around these ethical questions related to AI. I think when we're talking about AI ethics in an organizational context, what we're really talking about is the importance of good governance. So, making sure that systems are transparent, reliable, secure, and used with appropriate human oversight. So, I think there's a lot of value in responsible design, deployment, and oversight. And these are things that many companies on the industry side are already prioritizing individually as part of strengthening their risk management practices in order to try and build trust with consumers and then with their employees internally. So there's a couple of common ethical considerations in this governance context that I hear many organizations are thinking about or actively deploying themselves already. This is by no means an exhaustive rundown, but a couple of things that I think about. Number one being this concept of like transparency and clarity of use. So organizations are increasingly focused on being clearer in their policies about when and how AI is used, especially in high impact decisions. And this involves a combination of documentation, thresholds, testing, internal controls to help teams understand system behavior and support explainability when needed. This is important for a variety of reasons because it particularly matters as organizations are trying to evaluate whether the systems are performing as intended. And tying this back to ethical integration, it connects directly to fairness. I think organizations are really actively trying to implement processes to identify, measure, and mitigate bias to the extent that they can and ensure systems operate fairly. This directly ties into another consideration, which is that human oversight and accountability piece. Leading organizations in their governance models are treating AI as a decision support tool and not a end-all be-all decision maker. So this means keeping humans responsible for important outcomes and ensuring that there are governance and structures in place to review and supervise how AI systems are being used. Effective human-in-the-loop oversight means people are involved at different critical stages, from system design and testing to monitoring the outputs once the system is deployed. And, this can also look like having a clear escalation process when something doesn't look right. So when organizations place value in their own frameworks and their policies around having humans in the loop, it reinforces that AI is there to augment human judgment and not replace it. And I think it also helps being able to start to build trust inside the organization and then with the public. And last consideration here that I think is really strongly tied to ethics is having strong data stewardship. So responsible and ethical AI, I think, starts with responsible data practices, which entails protecting privacy, securing systems, and using data appropriately. Many companies are already applying and should be applying existing privacy and security frameworks and focusing on privacy laws and complying and applying that to AI development and deployment. And this is more important than ever considering the huge volumes of data that AI relies upon. So adequate privacy and security protections are necessary to prevent misuse of sensitive information. So I think when organizations get these fundamentals right, ethical AI becomes a natural outcome of good design and good governance. And there's a couple of like specific commonly held frameworks that a lot of organizations are using that I'm happy to talk a little bit more about later. Such as the NIST AI risk management framework is a very popular best practices model in the United States. It's not an official standard per se, but it's something that a lot of organizations go off of, and was created with a lot of stakeholder input. So I think the bones are there. A lot of organizations are implementing these things, but there isn't standardization and equalization yet in terms of what the requirements are in those areas.
So Bethany, if I can recap what you just talked about, it spurs up the memory of my childhood. I used to go to circus where, it's almost like a taming the AI tiger by the
Hmm.
ringmaster, meaning we don't want this AI tiger to be completely out in the wild, but you want the human to actually co-pilot it. But as you know, in reality, AI models, especially the advancement in multi-agentic platforms and the large language models, are capable of self-determining the outcome at some point, both predictively and prescriptively. So basically, these guardrails that we're trying to establish is to limit the potential of what this AI can do and have the oversight as human, as we, as a species, will still ultimately be the decision maker in some value chain. Is that
Yeah.
properly articulated?
Yeah, it definitely is. And I think these conversations, they do start to get a little more fuzzy as we're now getting into the AI agent system realm, right? And the kind of autonomous tools now, and we're having active discussions about what does human in the loop look like in certain contexts, right? And a lot of that is like context specific, organization specific. But I think the point is there's a tremendous value in continuing to have humans in the process, no matter how far the technology evolves. It's just a matter of doing that in a smart and effective way, going forward.
Well, oh, absolutely, right. And I think we have a recent case study before I actually want to jump into my analogy of taming the AI tiger. Anthropic versus Pentagon and DOW. We just had the recent sort of a head-to-head debate about uh, Anthropic not being able to collaborate, being able to change the model of having an access to certain types of data. Uh, it just brings me sort of a conversationally that government can actually influence, obviously through the regulatory process of when you talk about the human-centric design, but this can also be some of the adversarial uh, countries can actually use this as a vehicle to have the dark side of the AI. How do you guys look at it? How does the industry, the representative industry like SIIA, think of all of these things and strike the balance?
Yeah, great question, and a lot to unpack there. I think there is concern that adversaries are using this technology in a way that is nefarious, and we have seen this already. Prior to me being in AI policy, I worked more on like cybersecurity policy issues, and I got into that space because I was concerned about foreign adversaries hacking into the grid system, for example, right? And I think AI just exacerbates a lot of those existing concerns that we have related to the use of these technologies. I think that's why it's really, really important that us on the U.S. side have a really strong strategy in terms of setting the guardrails, setting the frameworks, and ensuring that we remain a democratic leader across the rest of the globe to combat the things that we're seeing that are suboptimal. And it's tricky because the government is going to have its agenda, the industry has its agenda, and I think regardless of what administration we're in, there's always been an active dialogue and an active feedback loop about how to bolster U.S. competitiveness and U.S. leadership in the technology space. I think striking the right balance in any form of policymaking is always quite challenging. I've seen it, firsthand in a variety of domains. In the context of AI innovation, without a doubt, I think good AI policy that's going to strengthen our posture from a democratic perspective should enable innovation while also protecting people and maintaining a balance in that process and developing laws and regulations around the technology that will allow the innovation to flourish while also making sure that stakeholder voices are represented across groups like we mentioned. You mentioned the Anthropic Department of War situation, and I won't comment on it too much. Anthropic is one of our members, and I don't want to speak on their behalf, but what I will say is, us as an industry organization do have concerns with the supply chain risk designation of a domestic firm. And we actually last week we wrote a coalition letter that a variety of other industry groups signed on to that was delivered to the president that essentially said, there are concerns across industry of what the implication is when you do this type of designation. And, this goes beyond just Anthropic, but it's really how is this reflective and implicated for the rest of industry. And obviously this will be contested in court. But I think there are concerns there. And I think industry really wants to make sure that we're striking the right balance with the government. Industry wants to be a partner. And I think industry at large is still committed to facilitating that dialogue to make sure that that partnership remains there, because that is very critical for, frankly, combating the adversaries from a broad perspective.
Yeah. Well, Bethany, I'm actually writing a blog on this, by the way, so I'm going to be on the record. My position, I think your Anthropic had done an incredible moral courage-driven policy decision, albeit right now it's created a friction, but yet very highly regarded by the industry. In fact, you look at it, the transition number of subscriptions moving from OpenAI to Anthropic has been in numbers, record numbers. And so community and the society at large has appreciated the stance that Anthropic has taken. And I completely agree with you that this process needs to be a lot more democratic in terms of if we were to become the role model, if we were to create the strawman or the standard for how the rest of the world should and can operate, we need to be the role model by actually practicing what we want to preach. So I think it's a brilliant use case that I'm in process of opinionating on it.
Absolutely.
I would love to hear, once I finish writing the blog, I would love to hear your opinion on that as well. But let's go back to this whole technology. I've written a few books, and each of my books, the introductory chapter always talks about the history. In some cases, I've gone back to the millennia. some cases centuries. When I look at the innovation, and let's just stay focused just within the 1,000 years, because I can go back to 5 millennia, right, and look at it. There were species. This space that we're in is beyond the inflection point. And I'll make my case. Why do I say that? So you look at it, the biggest inventions over the last few centuries, right? They used to occur very seldom, meaning in one's lifetime, because imagine the average lifespan of the humans, our ancestors a couple of centuries ago wasn't as big. So it used to happen in one's lifetime, if not once every other lifetime, right? So you go through about 3 to 4 generations before you see something massively different. Post-industrial revolution. So let's even take one major innovation, the invention of, let's say, electricity, or invention of a steam engine, converting energy into the mechanical force, right? That has obviously created transformative forces in which we actually enjoy the growth of industrial revolution into now the digital revolutions. But then you come to think about the global supply chain network that was created over the last 40 years. And I'm focusing on that purely from the supply chain vantage point. One of the things really strikes me is how the global supply chain network design emerged when we decided that, yes, the globalization is the best way we can interconnect culturally, commercially, and from the policy side to not only drive one's economy to the next frontier, but bring everybody else with us. The rising tide lifts all boats. And we did that very successfully. But let's look at it, that innovation specifically, and I'm going to tie this to the AI. That outsourcing of manufacturing occurred in late 80s, early 90s. That was unregulated. There was no study done. There was no policy discussions. What we're talking about it today. Implication of human capital wasn't considered. And post-outsourcing boom, where we left hundreds of thousands, if not millions, out of jobs in the rust belt of our country without any plan to reskill them, retool them, and reintroduce them back to the workforce. It concerns me now. I look at it, as much as I'm the big optimist about the opportunities this AI frontier is going to have. But if we do not anticipate this, and I have a slide that I would like to share, and I want to really gain your perspective on this. So let's see if I can share my screen. So Anthropic Research published this. So if you look at it, the implication and the theoretical AI coverage, that actually directly could impact potentially the human capital, right?
Yeah.
And my hypothesis is, because I am now so deep into writing cases on the supply chain vantage from agentic, multi-agentic AI, that I almost feel like you give me within the supply chain any function, about 18 months, we can build a system that can either replicate or co-pilot with the person of that job, or completely autonomously execute all the tasks that that person has done for maybe 20, 30 years. So if I look at it, this slide, right? I mean, you look at it, some of the theoretical AI coverage, it touches in some industries more than the others. But if you think about it, is scary value proposition. So I have 2 questions for you. Do you think the policymakers are truly looking at this force as one of the most transformative force that we are going to go through and going through as we speak, faster than any other technological evolution that we have dealt with? And B, are we prepared to talk about what that new frontier of human capital should look like?
Excellent questions. And I really do think people people are concerned that policy and regulation is not keeping up with how fast this is happening and this transformation. Um, my personal view here, not specifically on behalf of my organization, I think the policy community at large has been a little bit behind at addressing the workforce implications of AI compared to maybe some of the other AI policy domains that folks have been grappling with for a little bit longer now. And particularly, what I mean by this is in terms of delineating like what role and responsibility does government and lawmakers have in addressing workforce displacement or workforce upskilling, reskilling, et cetera. What onus does industry have? Who are the different players and what are they doing? I think this requires a whole of society approach. Now, in terms of lawmakers and their view of this being a transformative force, I think they are very aware. And I've been working in AI policy specifically for about 2.5 years now, and I've been in Washington D.C. for 5 years, and nobody was talking about AI the first few years I lived here. In Congress or even like at the state and local level, and but internationally, they were. We had the EU AI Act and all of that. So I think depends on where you are in the world and how preemptive you are in addressing these things. But I think um, lawmakers are really trying to strike the right balance. I think that's maybe why things take a bit longer than people hope, but I don't think that discounts the fact that people see this as really transformative. On the other hand, people in the lawmaking community, they have lots of priorities, right? And constituencies to listen to. And I think what will energize them to take action around AI sooner rather than later is really going to be how much noise their constituencies start to raise about this. And I mean this both on the consumer side, the community side, but also the industry side. And so there is always kind of a constant battle for attention here. But you mentioned back on the Anthropic topic how now Claude is #1 on the App Store as a result of the situation with the Department of War. This was really interesting for me to see because this was one of the first times I've really seen a lot of the general public um, have a really keen interest in like what's happening in these conversations. Not often do you hear like the average consumer care about federal procurement policy and how that impacts AI systems, right? And so I think we're improving. It's becoming more of a focal point, and I do think, unfortunately, um, back on the workforce topic here in the displacement. I'm at a point where I think this is happening. It's happening in real time, and we're probably going to reach some lows before there's actually an adequate policy focus on this. But I will say there's a lot already happening to try and mitigate these concerns. Um, I think we spend a lot of time talking about the displacement that AI might create for the workforce. Looking at this chart here, and I don't want to discount any of that, but I also think the rapid growth of emerging technologies, not just AI, but now as we think of quantum and all of the other innovations that are on the horizon, this is driving a demand for new types of talent and new jobs from, cybersecurity specialists who can help with the AI agent systems and monitoring them, from the technicians who are maintaining the data centers, the complex energy and hardware systems that support the AI. Meeting this demand requires aligning education and training programs and the workforce with the realities of tomorrow's economy. So I think there's a lot of work that can still be done to empower workers and communities to understand and use and shape how AI is used. And I think it's not only essential for economic competitiveness, but also for ensuring that the benefits of AI are widely shared, instead of kind of creating a more pessimistic sentiment around the technology altogether. So to my point earlier, I think this is a whole of society approach. I think lawmakers need to prioritize this. Industry is already investing in a lot of upskilling and reskilling and collaborating with different states and localities on AI accelerator hubs. And I think these are all really good things. I think sometimes what could be done better is reaching the right people and actually communicating what is industry already doing in this space and the investments that they're making. It's there, but then how can the policymakers fill in those gaps? I think there's still not a ton of consensus around that. Unfortunately, there's a lot of ideas, but moving those ideas forward, I don't think we see a clear strategy yet on the workforce piece. But I'm optimistic that that will happen, and it will need to happen in the really near term. So I think continuing to voice your concerns about it from your vantage point, Professor, but if your students have thoughts and perspectives, I think there's a lot of value in reaching out to your lawmakers and writing thought pieces on your perspective on this, because I think that all needs to be heard in order to craft effective policy to help address this.
Yeah. No, I completely agree, Bethany. And I'm an eternal optimist about what this frontier is going to offer the humanity in a many front. But if you just look at it, this chart that what I'm sharing,
Yeah.
this is just a digital AI,
Yeah.
right? And if I dissect this further, it basically is going after the knowledge professionals, which are the somebody who has gone through the bachelor's and master's and so forth, right? I mean, you see the impact on what we call the blue collar jobs is not as significant, which is very different than all the major innovation that has occurred to date
Yeah.
that was primarily focused on the blue collar, right? But now,
Yeah.
if I layer on top of this, Bethany, the physical AI, the robotics and humanoid and other, so we're just talking about the digital AI. But
Right. Yeah.
if I add the physical AI on top of it, now that is a whole different conversations we need to have at other time to actually really say what are those emerging forces about the digital AI and the physical AI and what that shapes, and that truly where the workforce conversation really needs to come in, because if you fall asleep like we did during the network restructuring of this whole globalized economy, right? And we learned through the COVID, we learned through geopolitical conflict and then the policy frictions that this could actually end up creating situations that we as a human species have not dealt with it in the past. So again, it's not a dooms and glooms, but rather it's truly a point of discussions, and you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
People,
And you look at this chart and you see here that, and I mentioned this earlier, like the need for like construction workers and people to help construct data centers and all of that, like highly important for this technology to evolve. But not everyone is going to want to be a construction worker, nor is physically able to do that, right? It's a very kind of niche thing. I think just again, like a more personal perspective, something that excites me about AI that I think could apply to the more like knowledge worker domain is the ability for you to be able to start a business, run a business. There's a lot of barriers to access that are broken down now that we have these AI tools. And so I would love to see a world in which a lot of us become essentially our own boss and are able to like autonomously run businesses because AI tools enable us to do that. And that's just my like Gen Z perspective here with kind of an entrepreneurial mindset. The ability to start a small business or a startup. There's a lot of barriers to access that have been broken down, and I think what's going to need to happen though is educating people around those opportunities, how those tools can be used in those ways, and how you can apply your existing knowledge worker skills to maybe go out and do something that you've always wanted to do. I don't know how we get there, steps A, B, C, D, but it's something I'm thinking about and something that keeps me optimistic. Despite I think a lot of the more negative narratives that we get coverage on around right now. I think there's room for both of these narratives to coexist at once.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And again, I think I am, and that this is why I believe that we are out of all of the transformative forces that I've studied over millennia or even centuries. I believe that we will figure this out. And I think this is not going to be paradigm shift, but rather paradigm break, in which even do we have to work 40 hours a week?
Right.
Do we have
I don't
to
want to have to
really?
do that.
Exactly, right? I mean, and so I think if we start to now imagine the world in which we can actually have the technology work for us in a very constructive way, right? We all have to take the same pill designed by billions of pills created by the one single formula of pharmacology? No, because we are a very unique individuals. Maybe that's the way that our medicine, our approach, our personal consumptions, our personal interactions, and all of those things are very individualized, and the world is very different, right? And and I think, and there is that promised land. I think this could be almost like a Disneyland's motto, a happy place for everybody, right? And hopefully
Yeah.
we get there. So we're coming to the close, and I would love to have you back again. I think we want to talk about this whole integration on the AI frontiers and what that future is going to look like. Let's say 2050, if we were to imagine that world, Bethany, you and I, I would love to share that perspective, what I think and what your thought is. But to bring this conversation about AI and its implications from the policy, from the industry, and from the humanistic standpoint, what are the one thing that you would recommend that each of these key stakeholders? So let's start with the policy, followed by the industry, followed by the personally.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, I think policymakers, one thing, that I think we always try to encourage them to think about in the near term from a policy standpoint is um, focusing on regulating the most high risk use cases. And, there's a lot of AI uses that are lower risk. And I think making sure to delineate when you're regulating something, what's going to impact someone's livelihood versus, interacting with a customer service chatbot. Like these are a hiring decision versus a customer service chatbot. They're two very different things, but we're starting to see some proposals that interweave and kind of look at AI as one blanket thing. AI is very complex, so we have to break it down by use case, the high risk impact, to what extent there's a risk, and then looking at sector specific approaches and not wrapping every sector into one bucket. So that's something I encourage the policymaking community and lawmakers to look out for and to take care with and take caution with. On the industry side, I think there's a lot of good things that industry is doing. I think industry can really improve its messaging to the public around the beneficial use cases of the technology, of the existing initiatives they're doing to invest in communities. I think sometimes these things get lost in translation. And I think in order for consumers and the general public to build trust in the technology and feel more comfortable with it, that doesn't mean they have to like it, but to just feel more comfortable with understanding what it is, I think there can be a bit more clarified messaging on what those initiatives are and what the best practices are. Like I explained all those best practices earlier, but that's not always communicated in an accessible way of, okay, why does that matter for you, the public? So, and that's something that on the industry side here that we're trying to work on, even in a trade association context, is how do we deliver messages to people so that they know what's coming and what's already here. Just a takeaway for just general public, general consumers, I think continuing to engage with the technology, experiment with it, and also stay up to date with these policy conversations that are happening with the industry developments is really important. But I also think talking with one another in your communities about what your concerns are, what your excitement is really important. And your voice, regardless of where you stand in this kind of stakeholder ecosystem, your voice does matter and it does have an impact on how these things are shaped in the long run. So I always encourage folks, I speak to a lot of high school students on this topic pretty regularly too. And I'm encouraging people all the time, like, write a letter to your congressperson, raise your voice on this online. I think that's how we all create a more of a shared understanding and compassion for where we all sit in this ecosystem. And I think, as I've said a few times already, this all takes a whole of society approach. So every perspective here matters. And that's something that I continue to hone in on, even as an industry representative. I think just as a societal representative, it's important to make sure that a lot of voices are elevated.
Well, very well said, Bethany. I think you pretty much cover all three key stakeholders here, and I so greatly appreciate you joining on this podcast and sharing your thoughts very amazingly. You were very graceful and similar to how I see this landscape. I think there are great benefit ahead for humanity as a whole, and I think we just have to learn to embrace and then be also cognizant to potential landmines and how do we actually avoid those and how do we weave this conversation bottom up as well as top down. So thank you once again. Thank you, my audience, joining our podcast, Supply Chain Demystified. I'll see you guys next time. Until then, have a wonderful time. Thank you, Bethany.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed another exciting episode of Supply Chain Demystified. Stay tuned for the next demystifying discussion on the supply chain. Visit uscsupplychain.com to stay up to date on all things supply chain.